Paul, we're now going to move into what I've affectionately started calling my rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
When did you first know you wanted to be an attorney?
I would actually say in the around 1990, much later than most people. So I really had been interested in going into politics. So I went to law school with the idea that this would give me a credential that I was going to eventually go back to South Florida, where I grew up, and I was going to run for Congress someday. And then I ended up working for Joe Biden on the Senate Judiciary Committee in the late 1980s. I really loved the work and so forth, and was still interested in politics. And then I started working for this law firm in Baltimore and started to love the cases and love the causes, and ended up feeling like I could actually have a better chance of influencing the world in a positive direction. So I didn't want to become a lawyer until about 5 years after I finished law school. Prior to that, I wanted to be something else. So,
do you have a favorite attorney or firm to litigate against?
Let's see. I would say that the highest quality of litigation that we've encountered has come from Sidley and Austin. I think that they are unbelievably smart. They're very professional. They're very courteous, and they do particularly great work. And so I think that that's probably the best corporate law firm that I've encountered.
That's a great. Any particular office that you see more than others within Sidley?
You know, the funny thing is that I had a case against Sidley in which they had lawyers from 5 different offices enter an appearance, and at some point it was like, what, your people from London weren't important enough to get involved in this case? So I mean, it's, I actually think of them as sort of being everywhere, you know.
Right.
But,
well, I suspect I'm going to know the answer to this question, but what would you say the biggest change to the class action landscape over the previous 5 years has been?
Well, I do think that the Supreme Court's decisions in Concepcion and Italian colors simply made it impossible to bring all sorts of class actions, even where a company's clearly broken the law, clearly behaved badly. So I think that you've seen hundreds of justified, strong cases on the merits just disappear. And I think it's an incredibly unfair, harmful thing to America.
What is your favorite legal movie?
I really like The Verdict. I thought that Paul Newman's struggling, and he's got all these things that are weighing him down, and he's really trying to figure out as he goes, but his heart's in the right place, and he's got a certain level of savvy, and he finds a way to pull it together. And I like that. I frequently feel like I've been in cases where you start off with the case and the other side's got so many more resources, and they've got their James Mason, the old gray-haired eminence who really knows what they're doing, and they've got, this seems like everything's going against you, and you're sort of trying to figure out as you go, and sometimes it comes together and you work it out and you find the right way to persuade people. So I really love that movie.
It's actually a pretty popular answer. We've had probably 5 or 6 people who've said The Verdict. So what about favorite non-legal movie? Any movie out there? What do you love?
I really loved The Last Waltz. That was Martin Scorsese's movie about the band at their last concert. I thought that this was this group who had blues, folk, country, all sort of Cajun music, all these different influences, and it pulls together. I think that movie really, it's what rock music is about in a way that's incredibly cool.
Without question, my favorite music documentary. I don't know if it would make the top 10 of my favorite movie list, but on the music side, that's great. Speaking of which, have you seen or are you going to see the new Dead documentary, the 4-hour piece that's coming out?
Well, I'll definitely see it. I haven't had a chance to see it yet. I like the documentary they did the other year about Bob Weir, the other one.
Yep.
It was interesting. There was this really interesting combination where there are times where it seems like he's so smart and down to earth and a regular guy, and then there are other times which he's talking about telepathy and so forth, seeming to really believe it. So you sort of feel like, is he really on the ball and grounded, or is he crazy?
Or maybe a little bit of both, right?
Right, exactly.
Is there any book that you've gifted to colleagues, friends, etc., more than another book, a repeat gifting book in your life?
There was a book, Waiting for the Barbarians, by Coetzee. It's a South African writer that is really striking, where there's something about the vulnerability that humans have, and how you can think you've got everything under control, and it turns out life can shift around in ways that you weren't expecting, and suddenly someone else is in charge and you're not, and how people react to it. That I found really powerful and beautiful. And someone gave it to me, and I read it, and I sort of thought, this is a way of looking at the world where I can really benefit from sort of having this humility and this perspective. And so periodically I give that to people. It's sort of an off-the-wall choice.
Interesting. What was your least favorite law school class and why?
Let's see. I really hated federal courts. I found it incredibly boring. I did not yet perceive the significance that this stuff would have for the work I was going to be doing later on down the road. You know, I thought I was going into politics, so while I was trying to study these various doctrines. And I had a professor who was brilliant, but he really failed to make any of this seem relevant to the real world. So it felt like I was studying calculus or something. It felt like this complete series of abstractions that I couldn't figure out why I had to learn it. So it felt more like memorization than anything else.
Paul, what has been the biggest growth area of class action law over, say, the last 5 years?
I think that there has been a rapid increase in privacy cases. I think it's pretty clear that government agencies are doing very little to protect people's privacy. And I think it's pretty clear that companies have no qualms at all about trampling on people's privacy if they think they can make a dollar.
Sure.
So I think that right now, sort of the only line of defense between consumers having their browser history, sold for 10 cents on the, to someone is our consumer class actions. And that's something where you see it growing in part because a lot of times the people who are invading your privacy, you don't have a contract with them. So there's not the forced arbitration issue you see in a lot of other areas. And because also the statutes that protect privacy frequently have statutory damages, you don't run into this issue around the Comcast case.
Right. I'm also seeing a lot of sort of privacy cases being brought in state courts. There's a couple of states in particular, I think, that have been a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of having forward-thinking legislation that has private causes of action for privacy violations. And I'm curious if and when the feds are going to catch up to that.
Well, I think that the political climate's going to have to change quite a bit for the feds to catch up. But it's not clear, I don't mean to say by that that necessarily means you have to wait 4 years for there to be a new administration and so forth. I mean, I think that there are times when the political climate can change underneath in a way that forces the politicians to react. So like when the FTC adopted the do not call list, that was actually adopted early in George Bush's first term. And George W. Bush did not run for president with Karl Rove having all this tort reform stuff with the idea of, oh, I think I'm going to go after corporations that are abusing people. But there were so many people who were angry about these phone calls they were getting at night that all of a sudden the FTC do not call list became this crucial piece of government, this crucial government initiative that was pushed through.
And thus the benefit of representative democracy, right?
Yeah, really. It worked in that case.
Yeah. So again, a question I think I know the answer to, but in your opinion, which case is worse for the plaintiff's bar? Carrera, Concepcion, Dukes, or Spokio?
I would say Concepcion by a long shot. I think what Spokio is going to mean is really still has to be played out to quite an extent. I mean, there have been some cases that have been thrown out because of Spokio, which I thought were terrible. Some of the cases that were thrown out by Spokio haven't been as harmful in my view. I mean, I still am really troubled by the idea that Congress can say this practice is really illegal and this is something we want to discourage corporations from doing and we're going to incentivize people to bring cases, and for the Supreme Court to say, oh, well, that's unconstitutional, I think is an odd proposition. I think that I would have been with Justice Ginsburg if I were on the Supreme Court, which will never ever happen. But I think how bad that's going to be is still yet to play out.
Present company excluded, meaning you. What's the most worthy legal organization, nonprofit or otherwise, that people can put their money with today in today's day and age?
That is really a hard question for me. I mean, I feel like we work with a bunch of coalition partners who I admire a ton. So I think that AAJ plays a really central role in standing between a whole bunch of consumer and workers' laws from being wiped away, and is really protecting access to justice in crucial ways. I think the Impact Fund does amazing work in the civil rights area, and I think Jocelyn Larkin is one of the most admirable lawyers and people it's been my pleasure to meet in my career. I think Public Citizen does wonderful and remarkable work, and I think that particularly in the Supreme Court, they are real leaders. And I'd say Scott Nelson in particular, in my view, is probably the single most effective progressive advocate in the U.S. Supreme Court. Yeah. And if I needed a lawyer, I would want Scott Nelson to be my lawyer. So
God
I think
forbid.
of them.
Would you advise the next generation to go to law school?
I think that if people, I think a lot depends on why someone would want to go to law school. I think right now, a lot of people go to law school because they want to go and live in one of like 6 elite cities. They want to live in Seattle or Washington or New York or San Francisco, and they want to work for a big firm and make a lot of money. Those jobs are really shrinking, and there are fewer and fewer of them. And if you're not at one of the top law schools getting the very top grades, you're not going to be able to get a job in Seattle working for one of the biggest cities. So I think working for one of the biggest law firms. So I think a lot of people go to law school now and end up being really deeply disappointed. If you're willing to go a different kind of paths, you're willing to represent individuals against corporations. If you're willing to go to places other than one of the 5, or 6, elite cities, if you're willing to do a whole range of other things, there's a huge amount of America that's underserved. And so a lot of times I do encourage people to go to law school if I think that they're looking for a certain type of path. But a lot of times I'll talk to like sort of ambitious young kids who you realize what they really want to do is they want to come out and they want to work for Williams and Connolly in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And then it's really a question of like, well, how high are your grades? Because unless you are, at a certain pinnacle of the academic world, it's not going to happen for you.
What's the most beautiful courthouse in the United States?
I really like the New Mexico Supreme Court. It's not ornate and it's not as dramatic as a lot of courthouses, but first it sits in a really beautiful place in Santa Fe. There's the backdrop of the mountains, there's huge trees around it, there's a beautiful painting that sits behind, is on one of the walls, and there's something about it that feels like the way a courthouse should feel. It feels like it's like a larger version of the courthouse in To Kill a Mockingbird or something like that. Right. I think that some of the modern courthouses feel like they're trying to be the bridge on the Enterprise in Star Trek, and I don't really like that look as much. Okay. So anyhow, the worst courthouse to be in America is the circuit court in Florida State Court in West Palm Beach, because you're standing there as a lawyer trying to talk to a judge, trying to get the judge to pay attention to you, and your back is to this enormous window that shows both the Intercoastal, then like these huge beautiful buildings in Palm Beach, the Breakers Hotel and so forth, and then the Atlantic Ocean. And you can see the judge looking over your shoulder at tankers creeping up and down the Atlantic while you're trying to talk. And so I do not recommend that courthouse. I feel like getting in that courthouse, I want to put up a big black backdrop so the judge can't look at the ocean, which is more interesting, whatever's coming out of my mouth. Well,
it cuts both ways, right? If you have bad testimony going on, that can be very useful, right? So finally, I wanted to ask you if you had one sort of piece of poignant advice to impart on this next generation of younger lawyers who are just up and coming and trying to begin their careers, what would that be?
I really think that that incrementalism is an important idea. I think you meet a lot of young people who come in and they're thinking, well, my first year I'm going to stop climate change, and then next year after that I'm going to move on to eliminate racism, and they're deeply frustrated if they don't make a huge difference. I'm 55. I've been doing this for a really long time. I think that I've worked on cases that have made the world a better place, but it's been sort of one case at a time. And there's a lot of cases that don't work out, and it's a huge amount of effort to make small steps forward. And I think that for people who sort of need to win everything, or people who need to have enormous accomplishments really, really quickly, this is a frustrating job. When I worked for Joe Biden, he had this sign on his desk, and I can't remember the exact language, but the gist of it was this. It was a quote from like Casey Stengel or somebody, and he was saying that baseball is a game where you play like 162 games a year, and the very best teams in the history of the game, won 100 games, which meant they lost 60 games. Right. And if you have to, win everything you're involved in, you're going to be living your whole life with gritted teeth, and it's never going to work out for you. And I think that a lot of times young lawyers start with us and they're so ambitious, and their hearts are so big, and they just want to see everything fixed really quickly. And I feel like, slow down, work at this and take it one bite at a time, and make the world a little bit better, each day. And that's a better way of approaching your life.
Paul, I can't thank you enough for being here.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the opportunity to be here, and this has been just enormously fun. Thanks, Steve.
Of course.